Hello, this is John Burke, CIO and Principal Research Analyst here at Emergence Research, and welcome to the webinar entitled Best Practices for Protecting Enterprise Data, which I will be presenting today. A replay of this webinar will be available in our BrightTALK channel shortly following this session. Today's webinar consists of an interactive presentation and a question and answer period. Feel free to submit any questions you may have along the way, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. Use the Questions tab or Questions from the Audience tab in your BrightTALK control panel to submit questions. And with that, let's go ahead and get started with the webinar. So we'll begin by introducing Emergence Research, the company that I work for, and the source of all the data that you'll see presented in any part of this session. We'll then discuss what we mean when we talk about information stewardship, the discipline of data management broadly interpreted. We'll discuss the cybersecurity challenges that organizations face right now, or at least the paramount challenge, and the new zero trust model for security, a new paradigm for securing enterprise resources. And then we'll wrap up with some recommendations on putting it all together. So about Emergence. We are a research and strategic consulting firm, and our focus is on analyzing and quantifying the business value that organizations realize by deploying emerging technologies. Our analysts, myself and the others, have real-world operational experience running IT organizations, and we collect data from IT practitioners. Folks like me, we get on the phone, we interview folks probably like yourselves attending this session. People who work in IT shops and enterprises of all sizes and all types, and across many different geographies. We'll supplement that with some survey data typically in order to get a broader sense of the market. The projects that we have ongoing or about to launch currently include the just launched Cloud and Security Research Study. We are currently recruiting participants for that. You can click on the Attachments tab in your control panel. There's a link there to use to register your interest in participating. Participants get the results of the research back at the end of the project, including our updated cloud and security maturity models and enterprise scorecards. Those will all be available in Q4 of this year, as we are just at the beginning of the research right now, and coming up in Q4 with results forthcoming in 2019, our IoT research study, our first one. And again, we're recruiting for participants. Click on the Attachments tab, and the link there will help you register for it. And again, you'll get back the results at the end of the project. So, information stewardship. When we think about securing enterprise data at Emergence, we always begin at the beginning, which is the proper management of enterprise data. And so for us, that comes down to what we call information stewardship, the practice of defining for every byte of information that comes into the organization, that the organization wants to manage, that you define how it's to be handled, where it's to be stored, who's to have access to it, how it's to be protected throughout its life cycle, and everything that needs to happen in order to maintain your organization's compliance with whatever compliance regimens apply to it, whether they're government regulations or professional services standards. Information stewardship is focused on keeping you in compliance with all of those things, protecting the data at every stage of its life cycle, and otherwise maintaining its integrity and quality. So what that translates to in practice is a broad range of questions being answered. There's a lot of essentially upfront and pre-work that goes into implementing an information stewardship system at your organization. starting with data classification in most cases. What data do we have and how is it supposed to be protected? How accurate does it need to be? How quickly do we need to have this data available if there's some kind of a disaster? Is any unavailability acceptable? If not, how are we ensuring business continuity and access on a continuing basis? Where should this data live? Should it be in our data centers? Can it live in the cloud somewhere? What kind of performance requirements are placed on it so that we know where it can live? And then with respect to compliance, where is it allowed to live by the regulations or laws that apply to it? Data classification is just one of the pillars of information stewardship. Based on that and on the need to practice all these stripes of stewardship, you will make decisions about organizational structure, who's responsible for protecting data, who's responsible for assessing and ensuring the ongoing integrity of data, and so on. That in turn requires and feeds on the classification of your users, typically only into a small handful or double handful of roles in the organization that will control who can see the information, who can touch or modify the information, that may determine who gets access to it first in the event of an outage, or who has priority access to it first in the event of some kind of crisis. And who's responsible, again, for assessing and ensuring the ongoing maintenance of compliance requirements around that data. And lastly, key technologies, things that you're going to need to lean on in order to implement full information stewardship, ranging from identity management and access control systems to encryption for securing things, data classification tools to help you identify information and then track it once you've identified it, and then all the panoply of storage and DR technologies that might be involved in ensuring both that you have the data and that you have ongoing access to the data when you need it and with the performance that you need. One of the things that is implicit in information stewardship, it's called out, as one of the key disciplines, but underlying all of the other thought processes involved is taking a full life cycle perspective on the management of information, that your organization's interest in data, essentially starts as soon as you acquire it and continues on through your organizational approach to classifying it and then managing it, putting it in the right place in your infrastructure, whether again that's on premises in one of your data centers or off premises in some kind of cloud or hosted environment. Lifecycle encompasses the idea of analysis and visualization of data, as well as analysis and visualization of metadata about the information that you're maintaining. How much is it? How much information is there? Where is it being stored? Who has access to it? Analytics and visualization tools can play a key role in helping you understand and control those things. And this is a very important piece that many people just don't think about, end of life. When is the organization ready to say goodbye to a piece of information and flush it from systems or allow it to be flushed from systems, and how does it track the fact that end-of-life policies are being adhered to? And that can turn out to be an extraordinarily important thing if you have in fact gotten rid of a piece of information and then somebody comes after you later and says, where's that information? And you need to be able to say, well, according to our policy, we get rid of things in 5 years. So 5 years and 1 day after we acquired it, we deleted it, and here's the log of that event. And it is on our backup tapes prior to that for another year, but those cycle on a yearly basis, etc. So having that end of life cycle defined and the fact that you're adhering to it, a piece of your monitoring and logging and auditing activity is key in the long run to good information stewardship. And of course, applying your security policies and compliance requirements across the board, starting with acquisition and all the way through end of life, a key consideration in taking a full life cycle approach to information stewardship. So acquisition, and this is just by way of explaining that you need to be thinking across a pretty broad variety of avenues by which data is getting into your systems, everything from flat file imports that are still happening on a nightly basis between maybe you and a payroll company, to live database links that might be connecting you to the back-end systems of your business partners or their back-end systems to yours, information coming in via web services, information coming in via any of the various big data on-ramps out there like Storm or Scoop or Flume, things that create channels for data to flow into your information systems on the back end, and that can collect information from a lot of different sources and send information to a lot of different sources. That kind of complexity is woven throughout the information infrastructure of most large enterprises and an increasing number of medium-sized enterprises and even small businesses. And so keeping in mind the idea that you need to keep track of what's coming in, where it's going, and all of the requirements that obtain to it based on classification, what kind of data it is, and all the other things that fall out of that, like who needs to take care of it and how and when and according to what compliance requirements. All of that continually getting more complex, continually getting more interwoven between your information systems and the information systems of suppliers, partners, and even customers or clients, depending on the business that you're in or the kind of activity that you conduct. Data classification being such a critical discipline in the pursuit of information stewardship and in protecting enterprise data from harm, it's important to give some thought to how you are classifying the data that lives in your systems. There are a variety of proprietary tools and systems out there for associating metadata, classification data, with files of various sorts and even with unstructured data, as well as with information stored in your structured data systems. It can bridge the structured to the unstructured. You'll find that some of them are focused on e-discovery and helping you, for legal purposes, know what kind of data is living where and who has access to it and so forth. Some tools are focused on the idea of master data management, establishing the system of record, the source of truth for different kinds of information in the organization, making sure all the different systems that, say, work with the object person or the object customer share a key understanding of what that means, even if they all deal with it in a different way. You'll also find that there are enterprise search tools out there that can go a long way towards providing you with a classification scheme and a classification tool set, help you find where data is and identify what kind of data it is. And even archiving tools, as well as some tools that are purely focused on the idea of classifying data. This kind of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum for most companies either, and that's another important thing to keep in mind. If you're trying to secure data, if you're trying to manage data, understanding what kind of data it is critical, and depending on the business you're in, there may be predefined categorization schemes available for you to use either just as is or as the basis of a custom scheme for your organization specifically. They might be related to the kind of information it is, like taxonomies of data for ledger information. They might be related to the business that you're in or the practice that you're in, i.e. medicine. So having this kind of information available to help you develop your own classification scheme can greatly accelerate your efforts and make it easier for you to work with partner organizations in the same kind of business as yourselves. So taking all of this in stride, a big piece of protecting information data has to be managing it properly in the first place, which involves defining policies for your organization around the classification of data, the classification of users or groups of users to help control and identify who's going to have access to what kind of data, and of course what kind of access, read-only or write as well. Organizational structures will be influenced by these kinds of things and defined in policies which pieces of the organization are responsible for what kinds of data, and will help you identify the key technologies that you need to apply in order to bring information stewardship into practice in your organization, maybe starting with some kind of classification or master data management tool, but encompassing how you use identity access and access control systems, and how you use everything from disk arrays to backup technologies, possibly even cloud backup technologies. And all of that will in turn become codified in the processes and the procedures that your staff follow on a day-to-day basis, the things that you build into automation when you build your own scripting and systems automation to drive adherence to these different practices, parameters, and policies that you're developing. So with that as the background for how to address securing data in your organization, what is in the way of implementing this kind of security and this kind of management currently? And well, the biggest challenge, and we find it's fairly comprehensive, is that there is simply too much data involved. Not so much the data that you're managing for the organization as too much data about that data. Too much data, especially in the security space. And if you're going to be using security tools in order to secure your organization, then it's going to generate a lot of information specifically related to security. If you are like most organizations, you have somewhere between 10 and 150 information security products deployed in your environment. And that's out of a pool of more than 1,400 on the market currently. However many you've got, whether it's 10 or over 100, every one of those tools is generating data for you about what it's doing for you in the environment. If it's monitoring network traffic, it's generating information about the network traffic that it's monitoring. If it's an intrusion detection or prevention system, it's generating information on the kinds of attacks that it thinks it's seeing and the kinds of defensive actions that it's taking on your behalf. And in the process of doing that, an organization of any significant size is likely to be generating 1 or more terabytes of information a day just on security incidents. So not even, audit trails of automated processes running in the background to maybe move data from active storage to cold storage, or from cold storage to offline archival storage. That kind of information, that's not even taken into consideration. We're just talking here about I think I'm being attacked. Here's a thing that looks suspicious to me. Here's an activity that correlates with this activity over there, and that looks suspicious to me. Over a terabyte of data like that every day. And at a higher level, beyond simply generating streams of enormous size, systems that we use to help secure the enterprise can in fact warn us that we're being attacked. And again, in an organization of any significant size, is likely to generate several hundred, and for really large organizations, thousands or even tens of thousands, false positive alerts a day. And to remind you, a false positive is the system telling you you're under attack when in fact you're not. And it takes your staff time to sort through the false positives and throw them out and winnow out from all of the alerts the true positives, the things that really are attacks or potential attacks underway that you need to respond to. But if your system is generating hundreds or even thousands of false positives a day, and if every networked device, every security system, every operating system, every appliance, every switch, router, hub, WAN optimizer, SD-WAN appliance, etc., if every one of those things is generating thousands of log events a day, in addition to what things like an IDS or IPS generates every day, the net result is that the task of correlating events, the task of analyzing events, the task of understanding, in anything approaching real time, what's a real threat that needs to be responded to and what can safely be ignored, would require hundreds of security analysts devoted all day, every day, to the prospect and to the project of analyzing that data. And of course, that's not something that most organizations have available to them. And the net result, the core problem for security professionals today is that there's too much data, but ultimately when you get down to it, there's not enough information coming out of that data, not enough meaning coming out of that data. And so you can be drowning in more data than you can ever look at and not have the key pieces of information that you need in order to proceed in a sensible way. So there are a variety of ways of trying to address that problem. One of the key ones that we focus on in our research is the application of advanced security analytics, which is, essentially applying big data type analytics tools and techniques, applying artificial intelligence and especially machine learning types of artificial intelligence to those massive streams of data and to use them to essentially winnow out the false positives, to understand at a baseline what goes on in your organization, and to develop from that the ability to spot things that don't belong. Behavioral threat analytics are a subset of advanced security analytics. They're focused on looking at the behavior of entities on the network, a person, a system, a program, and understanding, again, what is the baseline for that entity, whether it's software, hardware, or a human, and then looking for anomalies in that behavior. Is that person online at a time when they're not usually online? Is that system getting a stream of terminal commands from outside of our network? Is that system communicating with a system somewhere outside of our network during hours when it normally doesn't? Any kind of anomaly. Analytics can be the key to turning that multi-terabyte stream of gobbledygook and those hundreds or thousands of false positives into a stream of 10 or a dozen actual threats or potential threats that require human attention and require human intervention. In addition to reducing that false positive rate and focusing the efforts of staff more carefully, more closely on what really needs their attention, it can trigger automated behaviors that shut down malicious activity instantly. If you've got a good advanced security analytics framework in place, you can, without fearing massive shutdowns of people based on, again, false positives, you can implement automatic quarantining, automatic sandboxing of systems, automatic sandboxing of users or of their laptops or mobile devices in order to cut off a threat that's developing. You can, using this kind of a system, detect and respond to advanced persistent threats, respond to multi-vector attacks that are, maybe mixing up things that are going on via email, like phishing, with things that are going on at a low level, like somebody actually trying to break in at the operating system level to somebody's laptop or desktop. And lastly, and this is hugely important, especially in the aftermath of an attack, these kinds of systems can provide detailed forensic automation of what they saw, why they read that as an attack, and what kind of action they triggered in response if they're able to trigger things, as well as what steps were taken after the attack was flagged. It will also show activities taken by security staff to address a problem, and so those things will show up in there as an audit trail item as well. So trying to manage information better is an important component of reducing risk. Trying to manage, digest, and understand security data specifically is a huge step towards reducing enterprise risk. We're seeing, though, that the most forward-looking organizations that we're dealing with are essentially re-architecting how they let systems operate and how they allow systems to talk with each other and with the rest of the world in order to reduce the threat surface, if you will, of the organization dramatically. And that's the implementation of the zero trust model. Excuse me. So zero trust is based on a very simple concept, the idea that nothing should trust anything else automatically, that every trust relationship has to be intentional. And it was pioneered as a concept by companies like Google that wanted to develop an infrastructure that would support hyperscaling cloud activities and the separation of different workloads within that environment in an ultra-secure fashion. Knowing that they were going to be the target of an enormous amount of breaching type attacks, they wanted to make an infrastructure that would be intrinsically resilient to attack, that would dramatically reduce the problems that would be caused by any individual component being compromised, that would limit the scope of damage, as well as making damage intrinsically much less likely in the first place. It does not, zero trust essentially says that to me as a system operating in this environment, I should think of every single other system in the environment as being no more friendly to me than the least secured communal laptop or desktop sitting out in a coffee shop somewhere. It has an impact on every hardware and software system running in the environment and as a result of that, and is focused on securing data first and foremost. So what data is this system managing, and who then should have access to the system? Those are the key questions that will guide the basically creation of permissions that will allow data to flow. It uses a detailed asset inventory and a detailed inventory of staff and their roles and relationships to data as the foundation for providing access to information systems running in the environment. In this kind of an environment, our traditional delimiters of security, which have been firewalls typically, they no longer define boundaries. They're there as tools for filtering traffic, and they still fulfill a role in that regard, but they don't partition the world into risky and safe zones anymore. They're a part of the filtration system, but they're not defining zones or boundaries in the same way they have in the past. And of course, the idea is that data will be encrypted pretty much everywhere in the environment, at rest, in motion, and end to end. So these are some design drawings that came out of Google as a part of their Beyond Corp design, which was the foundation of the idea of zero trust. And as you can see, central to it, that blue square, the full inventory of what's in the environment. Behind that, you've got management agents that are running on different pieces of the infrastructure. You've got certificate authorities managing encryption of data and identification based on encryption certificates. You've got inventories of assets. You've got, of course, mechanisms to allow for exceptions and outliers as well. And then feeding off of that, an access control engine, so that whenever anybody's trying to establish a network connection from one system to another, from a user to an internal system, from one internal system to another, from an internal system to an external system somewhere else, that access control engine drawing on the information in the inventory is going to determine whether a connection should be allowed. And so it's key in taking us all the way back to where we began in the information stewardship space, the idea of classification of data, the assets that you're securing, classification of the systems that are touching the data, classification of the users that might need to use those systems to access the data. All of those kinds of classification are central to establishing a zero trust environment. And so in this past round of cloud network and security research, our 2017-2018 research study, we dug in a little bit on the deployment of zero trust in the enterprise. And what we saw is that overall, only about 13% of the folks that we spoke to had begun to deploy a zero trust environment at that time. Another 20% approximately were planning on doing so by the end of this year, 2018. And so this is still something that's quite new in the enterprise. And in most places, folks are saying they have it now, but they have typically a zero trust environment embedded within their larger environment. And it's something that they've built and are now expanding out to encompass more of what they do. And we saw that folks who deploy zero trust were significantly more successful than folks who did not. But it's important to understand, too, what we mean by successful in security. And we had pretty much one metric for it, which was total elapsed time at the organization between detecting a potential attack, incident, compromise, and resolving whether it was actually an attack, and then dealing with it, either suppressing it if it was an attack, or sounding the all clear if it turned out not to have been, if it was a false positive. And the most successful organizations were able to do that, on average in minutes. And the least successful organizations were typically talking about spending months doing that. And we have the exact numbers, and we'd be happy to share them with you if you're interested. Just reach out and contact us. So importantly, the folks who are involved in zero trust are also more successful. And no surprise there, the kinds of tools they've got to be deploying in order to implement zero trust robustly will definitely give them a leg up on identifying and resolving threats as they occur. So data classification, a key discipline in information stewardship, a key enabler of zero trust. We see that folks adopting zero trust, the blue bars, are 50% more likely to have already got data classification systems in place than the folks who have not adopted zero trust, as you'd expect, because it's a key discipline in zero trust space. Not as obviously a key discipline for zero trust, security automation. And folks who adopt zero trust are 70% more likely to be fully automating or significantly automating by making automation an explicit focus of their security acquisitions, their security operations. In the firewall space, we see that zero trust adopters are significantly more likely, almost twice as likely, to have gone to a virtualized firewall model exclusively. They're also somewhat more likely to be using a centralized firewall, and that, I think, ties in closely with the use of security automation and the ability to rapidly modify the firewall's behavior using scripts and automation behind the scenes rather than hands-on management by staff. Zero trust, because it's not just restricted to data centers, can encompass the use of advanced endpoint security, not just on servers, but also on mobile devices and even on laptops and desktops. We see that folks doing zero trust are twice as likely to have implemented advanced endpoint security options as are the folks not adopting zero trust. And for a reminder, what we mean when we talk about advanced endpoint security is something, beyond traditional signature-based antivirus or anti-malware type software, typically something involving the use of sandboxing or micro-virtualization within the environment of the endpoint itself to separate different network processes from each other, for example, so there's no possibility of cross-contamination. So advanced endpoint security, key to zero trust. Behavioral threat analytics. You can do zero trust without doing behavioral threat analytics, but we find that that's not all that common. The folks who do zero trust are highly likely, much more likely than folks who have not adopted, to be deploying behavioral threat analytics as a part of their security infrastructure, far more than twice as likely, in fact. And looking outside the walls of the organization, we see folks that are doing zero trust being 60% more likely to also have implemented data leak prevention systems around their use of cloud. This is not common overall, and the folks doing zero trust are much likelier than everybody else to be doing it. Likewise, we see that folks using a zero trust approach are 3 times or more likely to have implemented a cloud access security broker to help secure their organization's use of external cloud resources, whether SaaS or IaaS or PaaS. Access security brokers can provide not just visibility into how external cloud systems are being used by employees, but also an added control plane, essentially, for quickly disabling access, for example. And so, again, fits hand in glove with the idea and the ideals of zero trust by providing both visibility and control into a broader array of systems. So, putting this all together, start by reviewing your data management efforts in light of emerging paradigm shifts, both, just the broad incorporation of cloud into the enterprise. And, at this point, your data centers typically only account for about half of what's going on in your organization with respect to IT, and the other half is out in the cloud, most of it in SaaS, some of it in IaaS and PaaS. Or the shift towards zero trust security. We're still in the early days of that shift, and even at organizations that are adopting, most of them are in the early days, and they are still needing to add key tools, still needing to bring key practices fully online across the organization. But having the idea in mind and having the goal in mind is now a key part of proceeding into the world that we're rapidly shaping for ourselves with respect to security and data and the need to protect enterprise data from risk. It's important also to invest in data-centric security and security analytics tools, things like CASB and cloud-based DLP tools to help protect the organization's information even when it's living outside your walls in some cloud provider's data center, behavioral threat analytics, and other forms of advanced security analytics to help you monitor what goes on your network based on the entities acting there, and are they behaving normally or are they behaving anomalously? Is what I'm seeing part of a subtle and far-reaching attack or just an oddball kind of a day for somebody? These are the kinds of tools that will help you make that determination without investing dozens or hundreds or scores of staff positions on making that same kind of analysis in usefully real time. And of course, as always, and in every kind of IT activity, seek assistance where it's appropriate. Look for folks who can give you the kinds of assistance, professional services, managed services, consulting services that will help get you started. If you're having trouble getting started, that will help you lay out the right strategy or roadmap that will help you achieve the next level on the strategy or roadmap you already have in place. Which, oddly enough, brings me to the question of how we can help. And of course, as a research and strategic consulting company, we can provide strategic support to folks who are trying to change the game for how they secure and manage data in their environments, given the speed with which and degree to which their organizations and their IT environments are changing. So we can provide direct assistance in developing policies around information stewardship, zero trust security, or anything like it, building business cases around taking on that kind of effort, helping build a strategy, a roadmap, an architecture, even helping with vendor selection strategies and the process of vendor selection. All of that building on the data that we collect through our ongoing research projects and the kinds of success metrics we can build out of that research, looking at organizations comparable to yours, the kinds of maturity models we can build out of that research so you can know the characteristics of organizations that are doing really well at this. And even providing, in some cases, interactive tools and models to help do cost modeling, to help plan capacity in different parts of your infrastructure, or to help assess vendors if you're going to go out and buy something, weighted scorecards that you can use in a vendor selection process. All of that in a context of direct ongoing support, advisory phone calls, written responses to inquiries, and of course access to all the research that we generate across all the technology areas that we look at. So that's how we can help. Don't be shy, reach right out. Now for more information about this topic, about the company, about our services, or anything that we're doing or engaged in, clients, please reach out to Nemertes Client Services. The email is client-services@nemertes.com. Non-clients, please contact sales. The email address is sales@nemertes.com. And of course, in either case, you can phone us at 1-888-241-2685. And before we head into the Q&A, I wanted to draw your attention once more to the Attachments and Links tab on the control panel. If you will check there, you will see, for example, that there's a link to our Unified Communications Cost Analysis tool. It's an interactive online tool that can give you real-world, customized cost data to help you select the best unified communications architecture and UC provider for your organization. I helped build that one. It's a pretty fabulous tool. I'd also like to draw your attention there again to registration links for our next security webinar, which will be titled Cybersecurity Maturity, How Does Your Financial Services Firm Stack Up? That's being presented tomorrow, as a matter of fact, August 29th, by my colleague, Nemerte's CEO and founder, John Till Johnson. Again, you can register for that webinar just by clicking on the registration link. It's on the Attachments and Links tab. There's also participation links on that tab for our next 2 research projects. The Cloud and Security Research Study, we're at the early stages of that right now and happily recruiting participants to take part. Again, in return for about an hour of your time on the phone talking to me or my colleague Jonna, you would get back the results of the research at the end. Just click on the link in the Attachments tab. There's a little form to fill out, just 2 or 3 questions basically, and we'll be good to go. Likewise, the IoT research project, that won't kick off until October, but again, we're happy to start recruiting participants to that now. We'll be digging into lots of aspects of networking and security and management in IoT, and it should be a lot of fun, both the interview and the results coming out at the end. So again, feel free, register to participate in that when it kicks off later in the year, and you can do that using the link on the Attachments tab. And now I will leave this replay of our information slide up while I deal with questions. And if you have questions, please submit them on the Questions tab, again, in the control panel. I'm going to apologize to the person who submitted something that looks to me like it's in Portuguese, a language I cannot read. I will do my best to get an answer to that question after I get a translation of that question and try and submit that to you after the fact. In the meantime, we do have questions here also. With respect to information stewardship, the question is, what is the hardest step to take in enacting information stewardship? I will go ahead and say that the hardest step is also the foundational step, which is classification. We see and hear from continually people who have launched some kind of data classification, information classification effort at their organizations, gotten into it, you know, maybe a third of the way that they hoped to, and then had it shift, had their priorities shift, and it was no longer a priority that they could divert resources to. Some have gone through 2 or 3 rounds of that over the course of the last, say, 10 years, and it typically is tied to perceptions of crisis with respect to compliance. So there's been another round of frenzied activity around this based on GDPR in the last year, for example, and we expect that, you know, most of the efforts that were undertaken on that basis will fall by the wayside as the priority shifts. As the 2 or 3 hottest pieces of information got classified, the rest will go by the wayside in a lot of organizations. And you know, keeping the fire lit and keeping the focus and the priority on it is a matter in part of building the right business case for undertaking the activity in the first place. That can help make sure resources don't get just taken away from it after the spotlight is off the issue. Next question, and this will probably be the last one that we do. Where do most people start with zero trust? That is a fascinating question in itself. Where they try to start technologically is typically in the area of microsegmentation in their data centers. And so that's typically making use of some kind of software-defined networking tool. It could also involve layering on a third party's software-defined perimeter type tool specifically for microsegmentation, not for general purpose networking, so to speak. What that invariably requires of them, though, is a deep knowledge of what should be talking to what in the data center, what should be able to see what in the data center. And that is often a level of knowledge that they do not have, or they have only for a small fraction of the overall set of systems that they deal with. And so they wind up having to back up one more step and either cobble together using systems they have in hand, analytics tools and the like, or going out and buying network analytics tools specifically in order to automate the process of mapping out what is talking to what in the data center and potentially identifying anomalous data streams even then, but also providing grist for the mill of identifying who should be talking to whom in the data center and beginning to define the allowed lists that will govern which network connections get established in the future, because the basis philosophy, of course, shifting to deny all, allow only what is explicitly allowed, basically means all you have to do is define who should be talking and everything else is taken care of. So with that, I will say thank you. Everyone, thank you for your time and for your attention and for the questions that you supplied. Don't hesitate to reach out via email, via Twitter, however you like, if you have questions following the webinar and want to discuss things with us in more detail. Again, the replay of this webinar should be available on our channel shortly. If you found this valuable, please share the link to the replay in the channel with your colleagues. And take a moment to send us some feedback. It's much appreciated and it helps us shape what we do in the future. And if you haven't already, I'll make one more plug for those links on the attachments and links panel in the control panel. Check those out, take a look at the cost analysis tool, register for one of the research projects, and check back on the Nemertes channel often in BrightTALK. We post new content pretty regularly. And with that, I will say thank you very much, and this concludes the webinar.